Hi, Peter McAleese. Welcome to IP Voices, the international interview series highlighting the creative minds and leaders behind brands and innovation. And today we're traveling to Rome, Italy, where Peter is based. And before Peter, we start, I will briefly introduce you, but I'm really super pleased you joined me today.
Thank you,
Good
Shirzad. Good
morning.
morning.
Thank you. So Peter is a founding partner of Akran Intellectual Property in Rome, Italy. He is a qualified trademark attorney since 2005. He specializes in non-litigious IP, consulting, trademark prosecution, and enforcement. As an EU counsel for several global brand owners, he's involved in all stages of the IP value chain, from analyzing and advising on prior right searches, trademarks and design, to the representation in trademark opposition and cancellation proceedings. His day-to-day practice also involves drafting legal opinions, coexistence agreement, brand protection, in collaboration with customs and finance police, UDRP, for reassignment of domain names and litigation support. And also, of course, Peter is known as a very active member of INTA. You've been involved with INTA Bulletin editorial board for many years, but also you've been very active member of the association since 2007. So I know it's a very short snippet of your background. So now, can you give the audience a little bit more insights into your career and the types of brands and innovation that you have supported over the years?
Okay, thank you, Shirzad, for that introduction. Yes, I came to IP by chance in that I had studied law in Queen's University in Belfast, and my degree was a joint honours degree. So I majored in law, and the minor part of my degree was in French. That entails spending a year in a French-speaking jurisdiction, and I chose Belgium. So I spent my third year in Louvain-la-Neuve at the Université Catholique de Louvain, where I studied law. But since it was an Erasmus year, I would put that studied law in inverted commas. It was a very, very fun year, and I met a lot of people, had a lot of fun, traveled a lot around Northern Europe, and met my Italian girlfriend, who was later to become my wife. And that is basically the primary reason why I ended up moving to Italy. But that's not the reason why I ended up practicing as an IP attorney, because I actually started working in the telecommunications sector when I left university. This was 98, 99, and the boom sector back then was telecommunications. I was living in Ireland, and we were in the middle of the Celtic Tiger. The economy was absolutely roaring. So I left university and went straight into this export marketing job with a telecoms company. And that took me to Dublin initially for some training, then to Paris for 3 months on a research project. And then I moved back to London to their head office, where I stayed for a year and a half. And then for personal reasons, as I mentioned earlier, I decided to move to Italy in the summer of 2000. Even then, my immediate move was not into a legal context. It was, again, I stayed in the telecommunications sector and worked for a telecoms billing company for a couple of years. Then in the summer of 2002, to my great fortune, that company actually got into financial difficulty and was put into liquidation. Now, normally when a company goes into liquidation, it's an absolute tragedy for the employees. In my case, it was the opposite, because I found myself with a lot of spare time that summer, and chance conversation with a friend, she suggested to me that I start sending my CV out to law firms in Rome. And I was a little bit dubious at that time because I wasn't a qualified lawyer, and I thought that would be a hindrance. But I did start sending my CV out to several law firms in Rome, especially those with an international practice, and had a few interviews. And then I was fortunate enough to obtain a training contract in a large Italian famous IP practitioner, IP prosecution firm called Barzano and Zanardo. And I started with them in October 2002 on a trainee contract and passed my professional exams in 2005. I stayed with them until 2014, and it was an incredible professional and personal experience to be there in such a large, important, and historic firm for so long. So that's basically how I ended up in IP.
I know you said you had some possible show and tell about like some products you wanted to maybe talk about.
We did mention that maybe I would mention some brands and companies, innovative brands and companies that I've worked for
Yes.
over the last few years. And because I'm in Rome and Italy, I thought it would be appropriate to only mention and speak about some Italian brands that I have been assisting over the last number of years. And I've chosen three, and I've deliberately chosen these three because they're companies that were formed around about the same time as our firm. And I feel that we've kind of grown up together. We've been in a sort of a partnership with them. And so without any further ado, I will speak about the first one, which is a company in the wine sector in the region of Abruzzo in central Italy. And they've been very innovative from day one. They started using glass corks in their bottles of wine. So the advantage, of course, apart from the aesthetic value, let's say, and I know that using a glass tap in a bottle of wine is it's very disruptive because we all like the pop of the cork and then smelling the cork. It's part of the ritual of opening a bottle of wine. But the advantage of this, of course, is that the wine cannot be corked. I wasn't involved in the creative process in the glass tap, but I did recently get involved whenever they developed this bottle, which they call Jewel. And it's a very attractively shaped bottle with a detachable bracelet. And let me just see if I can attach it to show you. Yeah. So with the bottle, you get this detachable bracelet. I filed this just last week at the EU IPO and it has been registered as a European Union design. So that's one example. Tenuta Ulis, a very nice wine from Abruzzo in Italy. Another company that we have partnered with over the last 12 years, again, we've grown up together, I would say, is a company called 24 Bottles from Bologna.
Yes, I know it.
You'd have seen so many of these water
Yeah.
bottles at conferences. They're given out free as
Yeah.
gadgets. They're everywhere in the shops as well. But many of those are aluminium bottles, so they are not particularly effective in keeping cold drinks cold and warm drinks warm.
Mhm.
Our client's bottle is a stainless steel bottle, and so it really is effective, and it keeps cold drinks cold for 24 hours, and it keeps warm drinks warm for around 12 hours. So, and they've also had a very successful co-branding campaign. They have co-branded with some of the most important Italian brands. So it's been a pleasure, let's say, to assist them and to watch them growing up as a brand and as a company. And of course, we have been this is protected as a European Union registered design, as have other of their products. And there's a little example of co-branding on the back. And the third company I wanted to mention is a company from Milan called Nabla Cosmetics. I'm not sure if you've ever seen them. They're very active online, and we have been assisting them with their trademark and design protection for several years. Again, it's a company founded around about the same time as our firm, and they're very innovative in their choice of trademarks, in their choice of packaging. Again, another example of an up-and-coming successful Italian brand, which is challenging, let's say, the big established brands in the makeup factor. So over the number of years, I've been learning a little bit about makeup, which is something that I know absolutely nothing about.
I can imagine. Thank you for highlighting these three. You basically are for lack of a better word, the in-house IP team because they don't have, I would imagine, large legal teams, right?
That's correct.
They're
That's correct.
smaller.
I mean, one of them has some degree of in-house legal capability, but not specialized in IP. So basically, they depend on us for all of their IP advice and protection. And
Yeah.
I stress to them that that's good. I mean, they should not waste time worrying about what to
Yes.
do. Just that's what we take care of. What they should do is be
Yes.
innovative, creative, develop new products, and leave the IP protection up to us.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Good example. Thank you for sharing. I was going to ask you how did you enter the IP field from being, I guess, a generalist lawyer in telecom and then moving to an IP firm in Italy? What would you say to somebody who was in your situation in the sense that you took a chance because IP was not necessarily your area of predilection, but it just happened by
Perfect.
chance and you seized the opportunity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, what was happening was when I was working in the telecoms company,
Mm-hmm.
a few trademark issues arose and I was dealing with them. And actually, I was being assisted by a firm here in Rome. And I ended up working alongside the person who was assisting me when I was the client. So that kind of started stimulating an interest in me in IT. And so when I started sending my CV out to firms in 2002, I did particularly focus on firms with an IP practice. So the seed was sown when I was working in house for the telecoms company, and it just, as I say, destiny took over from there.
Yes. And how was it initially as an Irishman to adapt or start working in Italy? You know,
That's
what were your initial observation or insights? And obviously choosing to live in Italy for personal reason is totally understandable. But beyond that, what did you most enjoy about, the Italian culture at the time that made you want to stay?
that's a good question. It was a big I would say it was a bit of a shock at the beginning because you know, I had never studied Italian. I'd studied French at university. I'd spent a lot of time in French speaking countries. My French was very good back then. And even when I started working here, I was working in a telecoms company with a very international um, outlook, and it was an international environment. So I wasn't speaking much Italian. A little bit in the office, but I wasn't writing in Italian whatsoever. So whenever I joined the IP firm, I had to start writing in Italian as well as conversing in Italian. So that was, and not only writing in Italian, but writing in legal Italian. So
Yes.
back then we didn't have the tools that we have now. There was no ChatGPT or Copilot, and we were still using faxes. So, but luckily I was surrounded by colleagues who were very, very patient. I think there was
Yeah.
a reciprocal interest in it, and because I was correcting their English and they were correcting my Italian. And I was doing a lot of, I would say, imitating. I was taking
Hmm.
phrases from opinions, and I was
Yes.
preparing a database of useful phrases for several months. I was working like that, imitating and chopping and cutting and as needs. And then I started to realize that I was no longer looking in that file. I was just writing these phrases and opinions spontaneously. So
That's super impressive. I'm sure that French helped you
My study of French really, really helped because the grammar is so similar. Um, dare I say it, in your company, I think Italian is easier to understand.
than French.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also quite hopeful for people who are listening who want to move to a new country to maybe live their dream life in another country where they don't speak the language. You see, anything's possible, and with commitment, and I guess and drive
And time because back then
and time.
I,
Yeah,
I, I was just married. I,
yeah,
I didn't have any kids yet, so I had
yeah.
a lot more time.
True. Thank you for this background. Now, what do you find the most rewarding about operating at the crossroads of creativity, business, and law?
I think the answer to that question is in the question itself. I like it. I love it because I'm operating at the crossroads of creativity, business, and law. And
Hmm.
I think what's particularly rewarding for me is the fact that I realized that almost everything I studied at high school, at university, it all ended up being very useful to me. As early as 14, I chose to study economics and accounting, and that really was useful to me later in my career. Same with French, which I studied at school and university because it helped me to learn Italian because it's one of the WIPO languages. It crops up a lot in work with EU IPO oppositions. I studied finance for a while at university. It's satisfying to know that all that hard work that I put in academically then actually turned out to be useful to me in a professional context.
How did the work in the telecom space help you also in your IP
That's a
career?
good question. It helped me because I know what it's like to be on the other side of the fence. I know what it's like to be the
Uh-huh.
client. And sometimes I say to my colleagues here, as an IP practitioner, you spend all day, every day in your office at your desk thinking about trademarks. Okay. The client does not. And so sometimes I will say to my clients, look, you do not have to spend time and energy on this. This is what we are here for. If you are producing wine, your job is to produce and sell your wine. And it's our job to look after all those problems that can arise with your IP. So, having been on the other side of the fence, having worked in house, I know that clients' knowledge of IP and trademarks is limited. And
Hmm.
so that's where your added value as an advisor and as a consultant comes into play to really take them by the hand and lead them through this and explain it to them, explain what you're doing, keep them abreast of what you're doing at all times. And that's another aspect which I really enjoy because I'm from a family of teachers. And so I kind of enjoy that teaching aspect to being an IP attorney, whereas you have to explain things in writing or in meetings to clients. So I think that I have that in my DNA to be a kind of a counselor, a guidance advisor.
Yeah. It's a good segue to my next question. What does it take to be seen as a creative business partner, not just the person who gives you the legal risk analysis?
I've noticed over the last few years a kind of a change in the way clients position themselves. In that it used to be, it was more of a almost like unilateral. The client would ask you a question and you would provide your advice, and
Mm-hmm.
then the ball would be in their court. What they want to do, what they're going to do. Let me know what you want to do. Nowadays, I find with younger entrepreneurs, especially younger clients, they want you to be like a very active partner and take a position, and they will ask you, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
And then they will put it to you and you give them your advice. And then they will kind of turn that on its head and take the other opinion and go, oh, well, I think this. What do you think about that? So you're kind of challenged at all times to present the problem in all its different nuances and to take a position and be very strategic in your advice. And eventually, then I would say accompany the client in the decision making process. To be a creative business partner, I think you need to imagine almost you're working in house with the client
Mm-hmm.
and what we should do.
I guess another related question is because since you mentioned you worked a lot with entrepreneurs, how working closely with more of the creative types or the entrepreneurs in innovation teams has shaped maybe how you think today, how you work, and how has it influenced you?
Yeah, yeah. I think by definition, the creative and innovation teams, they're creative and innovative. So the last word they want to hear is no. Um, they're designing a new product, or if they're devising a new trademark and they're
Hmm.
planning for the product launch and they're excited about it, and they have the press agency on board and the marketing people on board and they're ready. And then at the last minute, they remember that they need to check out whether the trademark is actually available. The last thing they want to hear is no. Even if you advise them at an earlier part of that process, the last thing they want to hear is no. It's like the song, sorry seems to be the hardest word. In our profession, it's yes seems to be the hardest word. So we here in the firm in Akran, our philosophy on advising clients is getting to yes.
Yes.
In our profession, no is the easiest thing to say in an opinion, on a telephone call. It's a no
Yes.
brainer. It's a no risk. You can still charge for it, but you're not really adding value to your client's activity. So our philosophy, as I say, is getting to yes. So we will, when we're doing clearance searches for trademarks,
Mhm.
we will literally go through all of the potential obstacles and we will investigate if there's use. We will look at the litigation tendencies of the trademark owner. We will do everything we possibly can to get to yes. And only if it's a clear case of this would be too much risk, this would go
Yeah.
beyond the reasonable business risk, would we actually say to the client, no. But again, it's all about being in a healthy partnership with the client. So if there
Mhm.
is risk, it's important that you make them aware of it and that you let them know that you may proceed, but you are incurring this level of risk. So if you're happy with that, and if you're not so risk adverse, proceed. If, on the other hand, you're looking for 90% certainty, then do not. So
This is an interesting area because it's not easy for a lot of lawyers to have that mindset and to be comfortable getting to yes, because to your point, we're there to assess the risk, advise on the risk, but it's very difficult, especially when you're in a law firm, to get to yes in a productive way. And the question I want to ask now is more maybe related to the fact that you're a founding partner of Akran, right? So, how, and you said it's the philosophy of the firm. So, I would love to ask you a little bit more about that. Is like, how did you come about to founding this firm and get to that kind of culture and mindset?
I think I was very lucky because one of the other founding partners of the firm, who you know, Andrea Klein, we worked together in competing firms for a long time, and then we ended up together in Akran. So it was like we were peers. Actually, Akran means peer in Turkish, so it all fits. And we found when we got together professionally that we have very similar mindsets, very practical, client-oriented advice.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of it was a match made in heaven professionally. We both found ourselves on the exact same wavelength in that respect. So I think it was our joint philosophy on getting to yes that then we were able to instill in our associates. So also we try to avoid scenarios whereby the client calls you and says, listen, I read your opinion. It's really well written. I really enjoyed reading it. Yes or no?
Exactly. Or this wonderful thing, give percentages and,
Oh, yes.
50-50 is not a good answer.
We ban 50-50 in our firm. You're not allowed to use 50-50 in our firm.
50,
I'm glad you raised that point. You're paid to take a position.
yeah.
So no, we
Yeah.
never use 50-50.
So now, can you share one non-legal influence that, shapes who you are, how you work, and your leadership style? It could be a book, artwork, film, place, whatever.
Well, one thing that springs to mind is I'm an Irish rugby fan, and I'm a rugby fan, and I'm Irish. So, one of our greatest ever rugby players was a guy called Brian O'Driscoll, and I read something in his autobiography which really struck a note with me. He used to play international rugby alongside, and for his province as well, alongside another great Irish rugby player called Gordon Darcy, and he explains how he felt so comfortable alongside this guy because he knew that he could take on risky tackles. And if it went wrong, if the guy got past him, the opponent got past him, he knew that he had Gordon Darcy at his back. And if he didn't get him, well, then Gordon Darcy would. So I've actually used that here in the firm from time to time on motivational presentations, let's say, to say, we try to cover everyone's back. We try to make sure that if you're on holiday, if you're not well, clients still need the job done, the work delivered. So we like everyone here in the firm to think, we have your back. We share a lot of information about forthcoming deadlines, about oppositions, about submissions that need to be filed. So we're always looking out for each other. And that's something which I would describe that as part of my leadership philosophy, let's say, making sure we're covering each other's back like Brian and Gordon on the rugby field.
Oh, that's wonderful. Great metaphor. Now, one thing that I keep saying is I love the fact that our field is very international. And obviously, you're a perfect illustration of that as a Irishman who lived in different countries, ended up in Italy. So, how working globally has shaped your worldview, but also, do you have any tips for people who want to be more effective in collaborating across cultures?
Yeah. Um, I think moving to Italy and learning another language and working in another language with colleagues who do not speak my native tongue has been very useful and helpful to me in my career because what I've learned to do is to always put yourself in the other person's shoes. And whenever we go to our International Trademark Association meetings once or twice a year, we meet colleagues from all around the world. My thought goes particularly to colleagues from Asia, the Chinese, Koreans, Japanese. They've made an extraordinary effort, not just to learn another language, but to learn another alphabet. So
Mm.
whenever you're speaking to these people or whenever you're advising them, you have to realize that they're coming from a completely different perspective and a completely different mindset. So it's all about putting yourself in their shoes and saying to yourself, if I was at their desk this morning in Tokyo or in Seoul or wherever, or in Beijing, and I was reading my email, would I be able to interpret it? Would it be the advice that I'm looking for? Would it be clear to me? So I think, yeah, working in another country, in another language has really helped me in that respect because I grew up in Ireland, which of course is an English speaking country. And I think to an extent, we're privileged as English speakers because we have immediate access to so much
Yeah.
which is culturally relevant. What I mean is cinema, theater, music. We tend business because English is the international language of business. I think we tend to be a little bit snobby. I'm not sure if that's the right word towards certain elements of foreign culture. So I'm thinking about when I grew up, there were some channels showing French movies or Italian movies, and we would kind of look down at them. a movie with subtitles. And I realized whenever I moved to Italy that I deprived myself of so much because there are so many excellent Italian movies, French movies, foreign language movies. Seeing things from the other perspective. I think Salman Rushdie said that the only people to see the full picture are those who step out of the frame. So I feel that whenever I moved to Italy and started living here, I kind of stepped out of the frame, and
Yeah.
looking back in, then I was able to see the full picture. So to answer your question, it has definitely helped me to understand and work with other cultures.
Great insights. Now we're going to move on to your perspective on what do you think gives a brand value today, right?
Yeah,
Economically, culturally, and how does IP shape that value?
yeah. Um, I think in today's world, in today's problematic world, in these difficult times in which we're living, I think there's huge value in brands who have a real local feel about them, even if they're not local. And I think a really good example of this, and I think I can mention this, is the company where you used to work and where I got to know you, Colgate Palmolive. I grew up in Ireland, and I think back then I was convinced that Colgate was an Irish company. I know that many Italians think that Colgate Palmolive is an Italian company, and they pronounce it Colgate, and Palmolive is Palmolive, because it's a company and a brand that manages, I think, to retain a very local, consumer-friendly feel. And I think that's particularly important in today's market when we hear,
Mhm.
you know, lots of headlines about, I'm reluctant to call them big bad brands. I don't want to get into trouble, but
Mhm.
no, we hear stories about brands being tax evaders, making huge profits, moving their headquarters to offshore tax havens. So I think to keep that local feel and to be one of the good guy brands, that has particular value in today's market.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. When you meet business leaders today, what is it one thing you wish they understood better about the IP ecosystem? Are they like common, you know, questions you get or common misconceptions you get from business leaders when it comes to IP?
I think that there's a misconception among business people that spending money on IP is like a tax as opposed to an investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think companies who export, they take out insurance policies to cover the liability that could arise from their export activities. But some of them will export into a new market and not register the trademark in that market or find out if they can use their trademark in that market. And that to me is like walking in, don't get like using battle as a metaphor, but it's like walking into a battle with no armor or no shield.
Mm-hmm.
So, they will take precautions and take insurance policies and pay premiums, but maybe not invest in IP. So I would like that misconception to be dealt with, let's say, for business leaders to realize that this is something which goes hand in hand
Mm-hmm.
with your market
Yeah.
expansion. Your footprint, wherever your product goes, your IP goes. And so your IP ideally should go first.
Yes, absolutely. And so now we're going to move on to a challenge. What has been your toughest challenge as an IP leader? And what did it teach you about the work that, we do, or maybe yourself?
If I have to be honest, probably one of my toughest challenges has been delegating. Because you establish relationships with clients. They
Yeah.
know you. You get a feel for each other. They choose you because they like the way that you advise. They like your getting to yes philosophy.
Hmm.
And once I started delegating, I feared that the client may not perceive the same value, and some will come looking for you even if you do delegate and you're
Yes.
on copy an email. They will still come looking for you personally. So thank you. I received this email from your colleague. Now to let me know what you think. Delegating has always been a bit of a challenge for me, particularly. I think it's the first thing to mind.
You said basically that you're trying to have, obviously, instill in your firm this getting to yes philosophy. What is your approach?
Our approach is No, I mean, it's giving back in that I was
Yes.
very lucky whenever I started training. I did 3 years of it, 2.5 years before I sat my professional exams. And I had colleagues who were very patient with me and would sit with me.
Yes.
And okay, I was taking a lot of work off their desk, let's say, but at the same time, they were sitting alongside me and giving me the feedback and making the corrections. So it was a very hands-on type of training. And we tried to do that here in the firm as well. Literally bring the associate to our desk, sit with them, go through the opinion, correct it together, until such times as they are autonomous. So, and
Yes.
I describe that as giving back because, like, it's like learning to drive. We all had to learn to drive. So whenever you see a learner driver on the road, you don't honk the horn at them.
Yeah.
And it's the same, I think, in a professional environment. You were
Yes.
a trainee once yourself, so at a certain point you have to give back as well. And then once they become autonomous, just train them and trust them.
Yes. It's not easy, but it's necessary if you want to build a
Absolutely.
sustainable long-term practice, right?
It's not healthy for the
Yeah.
client to see you and only you on
Only
correspondence all
you.
the time.
Yeah.
They start to wonder as well.
Yes, absolutely. So now, how do you see the world of IP changing, evolving, and what do you see as the next big legal challenge or strategic challenge for the industry?
Well, as you know, Shahzad, there are doomsday predictions about the future of our profession.
Yeah.
And it all stems from artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is having a huge impact on our practice. And it's positive in many ways, but it's dangerous in others. I mean, are we training our AI platform to ultimately leave us unemployed? I think not, but I do worry about how the leaders of the future will train because I mentioned there about the hands-on, side-by-side patient approach
Mm,
of a senior colleague training a younger colleague. With the 8 AI tools that are now at our disposal, I can get a draft opinion or a summary from an AI tool it takes me 3 minutes to write the prompt and it takes the tool 30 seconds to give me the output. And to get a trainee up to that level of quality, it will take 6 months,
mhm,
8 months, a year. Will the trainee stay or will they, for whatever reason, move somewhere else? So there's a
mhm,
huge temptation, I think, to rely heavily on AI, but at the same time, you can't bring your AI tool to a meeting with a client. When a client calls you and wants an explanation, clarification, wants you to take a position,
mhm,
it's very important that you have the knowledge and the skills and the background to be in a position to advise. So, yeah, the future of our profession, it's obviously
mhm.
hugely impacted by this change. It's not all bad,
Yeah.
but we will have to learn to manage it with intelligence.
Yes.
Good old
Are you
natural human intelligence.
human intelligence? Yes. Are you already today adapting how you train younger associates because of
No,
AI?
no,
Not yet.
no, no, no. In fact, just this week,
Yeah.
I said to one of our associates, no, there's no way that that new trainee is going to start using AI tools for trademark searches. They have to learn it the old way, the old
Yeah,
fashioned
the
way.
old way. First, yes. And we're going to close this interview with the last question, which is not, obviously, your career is not over yet, but I love to say if you had to sum up, your career or the value of the work that you do in one sentence, what would it be?
Based on what I said earlier, it would have to be, it was, I got them to yes.
Yeah, I love that. I got them to yes. Yeah, you got to yes, and you got the whole team as well to yes, which is wonderful. Thank you. It's interesting because in every interview, there's always some kind of line from the very beginning, a fil conducteur. And I can see one here as well with you from how you started in this field, your philosophy of life, work as well, your mindset, and your relationship to your clients. So thank you for sharing all this. It's really interesting to hear from you. And one thing that I always really admired also is how you left your country, moved to an entirely new country, and open your own firm with your partner. So I think that alone is an amazing and inspiring journey that a lot of people, I'm sure, will be very happy to hear about. So thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you.
Really privileged to have you here.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And, I could say the same for you. You left your country, you moved away, you worked in legal capacity in other countries.
Yeah.
The respect and the admiration is reciprocal.
Thank you so much.